All right, everybody. Training camp is coming up. We already hit you with part one of our three-part training camp preview. We hit the guards last time that we were on here, talked about best case, worst case scenario. Now it's time to do the wings, and training camp is getting started real quick here as media day is going to be tomorrow as we're recording this here on a Monday. So no time to waste. Season's coming up. Let's get into it. It's Green with Envy. Let's lock in. What up? What up? What up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy. As always, is your boy Will Weir checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me today, fresh off the beach, my best friend, co-host, and the coach of our podcast, the one and only Greg Menegas. Greg, you feeling nice and refreshed from a little beach vacation over the weekend?
Yeah, I feel great, man. I was in South Padre. So for those of you who don't know, it's like a little island in Texas, down in the Gulf of Mexico, about 5.5 hours from Austin. So I made the
Very
trip.
big for spring break, which is which is not obviously what you were doing down there, but that's if there are people in the Northeast that are familiar with it, I'm sure that's most likely their connection to it is some type of spring break, reference or maybe even haven't been there.
Right, yeah, and if you're looking for a new vacation spot, I would definitely recommend checking out South Padre as an option. Really good time. We were there for the off season as I'm on paternity leave and Danielle's on maternity leave. So we basically had the island to ourselves. Like all of the places that we went into, I would say, I don't know, 15% capacity. The beach, we were literally on the beach. So our patio, I rented this little Airbnb where our patio was overlooking the beach. So we
Mhm.
walked down a pathway and we were right on the beach. So
Love that.
with the baby and the two dogs, it was very necessary to be as close to the beach as possible. And because it was the off season and we were there Tuesday through Saturday, it really wasn't that expensive. So it actually worked out really well. I do feel very refreshed from the trip. I got to see the sunrise with the dogs every single morning. And baby James, his first time in the ocean water. I was a little scared though. I don't know if you heard that there was a shark attack in South Padre July 4th weekend.
Which is funny enough. That was when James was born. I did
Yep.
not hear that, but I'm not. I mean, I feel like I've heard of there being a shark attack down there before, kind of similar to when you go to certain parts of the Cape, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've brought people down there where they're like, I don't know, man. I was like, yes, it has happened, but like, obviously, you weren't gonna go super deep in with James. Not like you were gonna go with hanging, with James over your head, trying to hold him above the waves, So
No,
I don't,
he was basically in like the little wading pools.
yeah, it's like in a
Right.
puddle, basically,
Yeah,
like
he was
like
basically in a
right as it
puddle,
hits the shore.
exactly. But, like, when I
Um,
went into the water by myself, I was very conscious of there maybe being sharks in the water. I never turned my back to the horizon, so I was
mhm.
always looking at the horizon just in case I saw a fin out there. I ducked my head underwater twice the whole time that I was there. I was very, very, conscious of it. I think there's a bug on my microphone. There is.
I
I
did
killed
see
it.
something flying around on it. I was I
Yeah.
was gonna I was gonna mention that, but I mean, it's you gotta respect the ocean, right? Like the ocean deserves
Dude,
respect. The
so much
ocean.
respect for the
So I
ocean.
was talking about this somewhat recently. Like the ocean, it's what do you think is more
The ocean.
terrifying? Okay, you know where I'm going with this question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I
It's
asked
the ocean.
Danielle the
Like,
same question. Yeah,
yeah, the ocean versus space is what was going
yeah.
to be the finale of that question. And yeah, the ocean is absolutely terrifying. There's 100% some type of society, civilizations within, whether it's just animals we don't know about or whatever it might be. There's something going on down there. So you need to have a healthy respect for the ocean. So I do think that's good, regardless of what time, when, and where you go into the ocean. You kind of got to have your wits about you to a certain degree. One thing I am curious, and then we'll get off this and we'll start getting into some basketball here. Off season. You think about the off season for those listening that I'm sure a lot of people go down to the Cape, maybe go to Martha's Vineyard, even Nantucket. It gets a little weird in the off season. Like there's a nice medium area, which right now, if you have the time to go to Cape of the Islands and like the month of September because it's past like all the busy season, but you still get the benefits of like nice weather. And I feel
Mhm.
like it's still Padre's kind of weird, right? Because we live in a place where, especially, and that's like down in the valley. So it's beach season basically year round, but tourist season, ebbs and flows depending on summer break, spring break, things like that. So it was off season vibe. So it's good that you can kind of get around to everything. The Cape in the off season, very strange place. Did you get that same type of vibe from Padre, or was it still, did it feel relatively normal compared to the other times that you've been there?
I think it felt relatively normal, or is
But
it
you
like
understand what
just
I'm saying with the Cape
yeah, with the
getting weird
Cape,
in
I
the off
think it's
season.
just like you're
Turns into
really
winter.
you're part of the local culture there, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
like all locals, no tourists, so, like, there's a little bit of, the locals kinda side-eyeing you if you're not
This
a
is our
local, if
time. Like,
you're
get the hell out of here. Like, this is our
exactly.
time to like do whatever
Dude.
we do, which we've seen the HBO documentaries. We know what you do. And so get the hell out of here and leave us alone.
That's right, and that reminds me of this one, time I was in Falmouth with my family, and we were leaving this restaurant. I forget what it's called. I'll see if I can find the name of the restaurant, but basically, we were there at dinner time, so the sun is setting, kinda like right in front of the restaurant. So if you're driving past the restaurant to your left, the sun is setting in your eyes, and you can't really see much if you're driving too fast. And we were crossing the road. This is probably like 5 years ago. We were
Mhm.
crossing the road with my family, my brother's with his kids, my sister's with her kid, so it's just Luke and Ollie at the time. And this guy comes flying at, he's probably going like 45 miles an hour into the sun as we're on a crosswalk crossing the street, and he almost hit my family. And my brother actually pushed my dad and Steph's kid Ollie out of the way, and the car slammed on its brakes and almost hit Charles. And the guy like flipped off Charles, and Charles starts screaming back at him, like, "What the fuck, dude?" And the guy's yelling at him, like, you guys aren't from here, like, blah, 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 blah. And we fucking lost it. And we were just like screaming at the guy. Um, as he's going away, I'm giving him the finger, I'm yelling at him, and he slams his brakes on and drives into the parking lot. And as he's like coming into the parking lot, me and my brother, we just like start walking towards him, like we're about to throw down with this dude. And he goes in and he like grabs a gun out of his out of it,
Little
out
bit
of
of
his
Texas
rucksack.
and Falmouth.
A little bit of Texas, but it was one of the locals, right? It's one of the
Right,
locals
right,
where,
right.
like, it's a little bit different when it's a local down Falmouth. Pulls out a gun, starts waving it around, and me being a stupid idiot, I'm just like, "Yo, you fucking pussy, put the gun away, come fight us," like, I'm tough, I'm not tough at all, you know?
This is this
But
is this is pre-kid Greg right here,
yeah,
right? Like, I
pre
can't
dad Greg.
imagine you would be doing the same thing today.
No, and Charles, like, immediately when the guy pulled the gun out, Charles like, "All right, man, like, we need to
Not
relax," and
worth
I'm
it.
just
Let's
like,
move
"No, fuck
on.
you,
Yeah.
pussy, like, what are you doing? Yeah, come put the gun away and come fight us." But yeah, locals down the Cape, a lot different.
A lot different, a lot different. So yeah, interesting vibe when you get to hang out with the locals in a tourism community. But there's no good segue here, so we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna segue right into training camp. So Greg, as we're recording right now, we're recording here on a Monday morning. It's the 23rd. Media days tomorrow. So when we record next, when we get into the bigs in the best case, worst case scenario part of our training camp preview. By the way, if you do want to check out the first part of our training camp preview, looking at the guard room, that's back one episode here on the feed, or if you go to the YouTube page, you can find it there as well. But we'll have some stuff to comment to react to later this week when we get some of these media day interviews, which are starting early because the Celtics are going to Dubai or Abu Dhabi actually is where they're going with the Nuggets for preseason. So that's getting started a little bit early. So they get started early. We get started early. Time to get into part two of our training camp series here. Today, we're talking about the wings. So, Greg, let's set the scene here. Let's make sure that we have all the right players that we're going to be talking about today. So, the wings on this Celtics roster that we're looking at discussing today, here's who I have listed. Let me know if I'm missing anybody from this list. We've got Jaylen Brown, we've got Jayson Tatum, we've got Sam Hauser. Those seem pretty obvious. We've got Jordan Walsh, we've got the rookie, Baylor Scheierman. Anyone else that, I mean, there's some deep cuts here on that we could probably look to, but I think these are the five guys that really matter going into the season.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, tuning in, like, "Oh, why isn't Lonnie Walker here? Like, why don't you have, Jaden Springer listed?" We listed those guys as guards. the definitions are a little
Mhm.
nebulous when you get to the Celtics roster. I think Peyton Pritchard's probably the only like true guard. Like
Right.
he considered a wing at all. Like you can consider Derek White, Drew Holiday wings to some degree just
I mean,
because of
Drew Holiday guards Joel Embiid when we play the Sixers, so
exactly
that tells you all you need to know right there. So, like you said, Peyton Pritchard is probably the only guy that it's like, oh, he's only gonna guard Monte Morris. You know what I mean? Like depending on whatever team you're playing, like he's
right.
only guarding
Shout out
specific
Monte
guys. So,
Morris.
yeah, right. I don't know why that name came up, but yeah, shout out to him. So we've got our wing room set that we're gonna discuss. We've got 5 names here. So I think obviously let's just start at the top here. Let's go with Jaylen and Jayson, and let's start with Jaylen because that's your favorite player. He's the one
Mhm.
that when we go back to let's take away the Olympics, but looking at the last regular season, or not even regular season, but the end of last year, the NBA Finals MVP, the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, he was the one that was really riding high. So let's start with the best case for Jaylen Brown for the 24-25 season.
Best case scenario, I would say second team All NBA. You're looking at an all defensive candidate for sure because I think the reputation was kind of lagging behind the performance last year for Jaylen. He had always been looked at as a really good defender, but someone who had those lapses off the ball and whatnot. So I think he wasn't considered in all NBA defense campaigns enough last year. But after his performance in the playoffs, all those highlight plays that he had on Luka in the finals, I think Jaylen will, best case scenario is in consideration for an all defensive team and showcases that the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, the NBA Finals MVP, that was just like the beginning of what I'm
Mhm.
hoping is a prime that lasts throughout this contract extension that he got last year. Because I think that it is, Jaylen Brown being 28 years old at this point. I think with him, when you look historically around the NBA, this is when primes normally are starting, right? 27, 28 through the early 30s. And I think with Jaylen, the work that he continues to put into his body and into his game, he has surprised us every single season. He's gotten better and better and better. And I think, Al Horford had a comment yesterday or the day before where he's talking about the guys that are already back around the team, and he said Jaylen looks unbelievable. He said Jayson looks great. He said Jaylen looks unbelievable, and I
Right.
think that's something that coming into the season, I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, that Jaylen Brown continues to ascend to another level. And last year's playoffs was the beginning of a prime that's going to last for the next 5 years.
I mean, there's no doubt Jaylen has a lot of momentum going into this year, right? And I think one of the things reputation wise for Jaylen when it comes to, you mentioned best case being he's second team all NBA, potentially all defense, or at least higher in that consideration. It's so tough when there's 10 spots. Like it's hard to say he's going to make that, but if he's on the cusp of it, that's massive. He talked all last year about that being one of his goals. And I think with winning the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, with winning the Finals MVP, if the Celtics have the regular season that we're expecting, which is likely for them to be the 1 seed, no worse than the 2 seed, and honestly, the expectation is the 1 seed. Like I think even without Porzingis, this team should likely be the 1 seed, barring something crazy happening. Like Jaylen's reputation is what is going to get the biggest boost when we talk about end of season awards, right? Because Jaylen,
Mhm.
like you said, has been remarkably consistent and has actually grown year over year. Even though last year, if you try to go statistic for statistic, that's not going to look on paper. That's not going to look at the case. But if you look at the game tape, you watched all the games last year, there was significant growth with his ball handling, with his decision making. I think honestly, his decision making is the number one thing that jumps out to me. That was just so much improved last year, knowing when he needs to take over, when he needs to not force it, especially knowing when you add Drew Holiday and Kristaps and Derek White was evolving into who Derek White became. It's okay to rely on these guys. It's okay to move the ball. It's okay to make
Mhm.
the hockey assist, and it's okay to, he reduced his 3-point volume a little bit last year. He was more efficient from the field, even though he was scoring less because there was more mouths to feed. And so I think for Jaylen, it's continuing to grow on that once again and finding a way. Because I feel like for the last 2 years, we've kind of been like, man, it's really impressive how Jaylen finds a way to grow. But this has got to be the year he's kind of capped out, right? This is it. This is Jaylen, which is damn good. This is Jaylen. And so I think it's finding yet another way, which I honestly don't know. I don't have a prediction of what that might be, but where we're like, that's different. There's Jaylen growing
Mhm.
even
Here's a
more
question
because I
for you.
think, yeah, go for it.
Real With Jaylen, what do you think his X factor skill is for this upcoming season?
His X factor skill. So I think this, to a degree, gets into what I think, if there is to be a worst case scenario, that it is. And so the X factor skill, and it's, I don't know how to determine it necessarily as a skill, but it's continuing to, it's the mature decision making that he's made, right? Like I
Okay.
think that's like his X factor, because I think the worst case scenario for him is that you hit all these high notes, these peaks, and that disease of more that you hear about, right? That somehow creeps in one way or another. Like, people are human, right? And all of
Mhm.
a sudden you get this, hey, I'm the MVP, I'm the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, I'm the NBA Finals MVP. What, maybe he misses a couple game winning shots or takes a couple bad shots. The game is like, why are you giving me shit? I should be the one taking these shots. Like, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if we're looking at the worst case scenario, that would be it. And that's a regression of
Mhm.
that mature decision making, because I think everything else that we've seen him grow in has been something physical, and that was mental, right? That was a mental maturity. So I think for me, that continues to be the X factor. But like I said, he's surprised me each year where I'm like, oh, I just kind of assumed you were done growing in this one aspect, and he's
Yeah.
found a way. So I'm honestly kind of expecting to be surprised by whatever it is that he improves upon this year. How about you?
I think with him, the post creation is probably the X factor skill for me. He's been roughly, a 35% three-point shooter throughout his career, but with him, his ability to play in the post and play bully ball in the post and be efficient in the post, not only scoring but creating for all of the teammates
Hmm.
around him. I think getting the ball to Jaylen Brown in the post for him to kick out of the post was one of my favorite developments in his game last year and in the overall scheme of the Celtics last year. Is they realized there wasn't really a good option for any team in the NBA for guarding Jaylen Brown near the basket, and he was just an absolute bully, an absolute train near the rim. And I think for me, to go along with that post play, I think it's his ability to continue to hit 75, 80% from the free throw line. We talked about it last year. The Jaylen Brown free throws really gave us heart attacks throughout the regular season. He figured it out in the playoffs where he
Towards
had,
the end, the beginning was rough. So
yeah,
he
yeah,
ended up at, I think, about 66%, but
right,
it got better as the postseason went on. But it was rough
exactly.
those first couple games.
Yeah, the first couple of games were really rough, and I think with him, if he can figure out that mental block of the free throw line and get to high 70s, 80%, where there's nothing you can do with Jaylen Brown when he's near the basket, because if you foul him, he's knocking down those
Mhm.
shots. I think that's the one thing I'm looking forward to for Jaylen Brown, because I think, like I said, man, I really think this is him entering his prime. We've been so lucky to see such high level play from both Jaylen and Jayson so early in their careers. It's kind of hard to imagine them getting to a prime, like they haven't even entered their primes yet. It's just
Right.
crazy to think
Which
about.
feels
But
insane to say.
yeah, but that's probably the truth, is that they're about to enter their prime, and I'm looking forward to it.
And so when you look at Jalen, and we've kind of laid out that best case, in one of the last parts I was getting to, is that I think reputationally he's going to win a lot of tiebreakers that he didn't win
Yeah,
previously when
for
it
sure.
comes to him being second team All NBA or All Defense. Now it's going to be looked at, I don't know, should we make it Pascal Siakam or Jalen Brown, the NBA Finals MVP? And it's probably going to lean NBA Finals MVP in the one seed to Jalen
Right.
Brown, which I think in years past it would have been, I don't know, well, this guy's the number one on a 6 seed. It's like, well,
Mhm.
the number two guy now on the one seed, who's the NBA Finals MVP, he's going to start winning a lot more of those. So I think postseason award wise, he's going to start to get a lot more of those breaks. And so, Greg, when you look at best case, you look at worst case. Is there anything else you would add to the worst case? Like we said, disease of more, the free throw shooting. Those are going to be two things that I think would be influential in there being a worst case scenario for Jalen. Anything else that you would look at that if this were to break the wrong way for Jalen, this would be a part of it?
I think just to go along with the free throw shooting, it's just overall shooting with Jalen. That at times those shot mechanics can get completely out of whack.
Yeah.
We saw that going into the playoffs 2 years ago. We've seen that at the free throw line plenty, but he's gotten so good in the mid range, especially with his little fadeaway jumpers, where he comes to that big step where he can either fade away off of it or he can step through off of it. he's got such great touch in the mid-range area now that I just can't see the shooting falling off a cliff. But that would be the worst case scenario. I just don't think it's very realistic that you're going to see like a 30% 3-point year from Jaylen Brown. I think he's kind of proven who he is. He's going to be 35, 36% from three.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen's measurables as far as statistics go, are so consistent over the last several years. When you look at his rebounds, his assists, his steals, points have varied. It went from 23 to 26, back to 23, just because of all the mouths to feed. But he, like you said, he makes steady improvement in many categories or remains consistent. It's not as if, sometimes when you improve in one area, it hurts another area. That really hasn't been the case with Jaylen throughout. So I'm with you that I think when we look at his best case and his worst case, the realistic case is pretty damn close to that best case scenario. Like it's hard for me to envision, like it's going to be second team All NBA is always a really tough measurable, but that's kind of that's the area that he lives in. And so if him falling short of that is third team All NBA, that's still going to be a really, really good season.
Yeah.
And I think obviously there's a strong case he should have been on there last year. All defense, like we said, getting higher in that consideration. Got a few votes last year, probably a little bit underappreciated, but certainly if he can match or exceed what he did last year on the defensive end, it's going to have a lot more eyeballs and people are going to be, a lot more complimentary towards his defense. So I think in general, between these best case and worst case scenario, you're looking 80-90% towards that best case. Like that's my expectation for him going into the season. What do you think about let's go to Jayson Tatum. Tatum, best case scenario. Lay it out for me.
Well, the jump shot returns, right? With JT, I think that's the best case scenario is that those whatever happened to his jump shot over the last 4 months is gone. He figures out the hitch, he figures out his mechanics, the jumper returns, and he's hitting, high 30s again. And even the free throw, last year where he went to that little like change in his free throw routine where he would bring the ball up to his chest and then reset, almost like reminding himself of a position he was trying to get to. Like clearly something was going on in his head with his mechanics that he was working on. I think it's like the shooting pocket that he was trying to get to. And that's the best case scenario is Jayson Tatum becomes above average 3-point shooter again. I don't think he necessarily needs to be classified as a knockdown shooter. I don't think that's in there for JT, but an above average shooter who is great on or off the ball, that isn't overthinking his shot, that's best case scenario, because everything else with Jayson Tatum's game has risen to this level where if his shooting was there, he would 100% be a top 5 guy in the NBA. It's just the shooting disappeared, and that affected other parts of his game, affected his confidence. But his rebounding, he best case scenario, he gets that double-double, the Jayson Tatum over on the rebounds. For those of you that are still out there betting, as a dad, I can't bet anymore. I got to be fiscally responsible. So bet the Jayson Tatum over-under on the
I love that that's the limit you set for
rebound.
yourself responsibly. I can't put any more $10 bets out there. That's how I'm going to act responsibly.
And the line last year at the beginning of the year was like 8.5 per game for JT. I would imagine it's the over under is going to be set at 9.5 after what he did in the playoffs again. So with JT, I would say best case scenario, pure statistics, I'm saying 28 points per game, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, and shooting 36% from 3.
Yeah, just to comment on that rebound jump. So, funny enough, in the regular season, he actually went down by not quite a full rebound, but by about half, just a little over half a rebound, down from 8.8 to 8.1 in the regular season. But like you said, in that postseason, without Kristaps for the majority of it, was at 9.7 rebounds per game. So especially where we know that we're going to be without Kristaps until sometime in January, let's say, him averaging around 9 rebounds a game, very, very realistic here to start the season. And, when it comes to that jump shot, and like we talked about this when we had Corrales on a few episodes ago, like I'm the same as Gross. I'm about a 4 right now as far as my concern level on a scale of 1 to 10. It's not nothing. It's a little something, but it's not quite something to be too worried about yet, right? And it's funny looking last year, especially because of the way it ended, where in the playoffs he shot 28% from 3-point range, and I think on pull-ups was around 27%, so even like slightly lower than what it was overall. When you look back at his regular season, he took about 1 less 3 per game than the year before, but actually shot 37.6%. So it doesn't feel like we're coming into a year where it's like, oh, he shot in the high 30s, right? It doesn't feel like that, especially when you double down with the Olympics and the whole not hitting a jump shot for the entire time. So it's one of those scenarios where when you look at for Jayson Tatum, like you said, shooting for both his best case and worst case, shooting is absolutely important, right? Whether if it gets back to the level, that's best case, or gets or goes to another level because he's better shot. Kind of similar to what we talked about with Jaylen Brown, just being a slightly better decision maker with which threes he's taking. I think that will make a huge difference in his percentage. And then obviously the worst case is going to be if that shot remains what we saw in the Olympics, where he was getting it a little bit into his head. So we'll have to see where that rounds out. But for that best case scenario with Jayson Tatum, it's even, we said with Jaylen Brown, it's tough to be hey, second team All NBA is your expectation. Jayson Tatum's been All NBA, first team All NBA 3 straight years. So him remaining at that level and remaining in that top 5 MVP conversation, that's the new standard. Like that is the Jayson Tatum standard. So regardless if you want to argue if he's top 5 or yada yada yada, all the boring discourse you could go back and forth on and continue to have, like the last 3 years show that you can't really argue that when you look at the end of year awards and All NBA and MVP. He's right in that group, regardless if you want to put him 4 or 6 or 7. Doesn't really matter. He's in that category. So his best case is that shooting returns, and he's even higher up in that, just solidifying himself as I should always be, if I'm healthy, considered in that first team All NBA category. I should be in that top 5 MVP category. And then, of course, like we said, the shooting will be important for the best case and worst case. And in that worst case scenario, if that jump shot were to remain broken, if the decision making on which threes, specifically those pull up threes, which have seemed to be the biggest issue with the percentage wise of what he's taking and either and really not making at this point, I think from that, what could develop is if you have the rise of the continued rise of or ascension of Jaylen Brown mixed with Tatum continuing to struggle with his shot. And then that opens up more discourse of, well, hey, we get back to what's usually your hot take 10 games in that you back off of 10 games later. Is Jaylen the best player on the Celtics? And I think if Jayson gets off to a slow start, and I think actually maybe out of just about anybody on the team, Tatum getting off to a hot start, which is not usually his MO, I think will be important just from a narrative standpoint. I don't think it actually is going to matter in the long run if he has the usual Tatum slow start and then goes blazing hot in December and January like he typically does, or or whichever way it works out. But from the talking heads on ESPN, Bleacher Report, wherever, all the discourse that you're going to be sent in your feed, if he gets off to a slow start, be absolutely prepared for the Jaylen and Jayson discourse to gear up again and go to maybe even a whole new level, which I'll be honest, I am not really looking forward to.
Thinking about the first team All NBA from last year, right? It was Giannis, Luka, Shea, Jokic, and Tatum, right? So there's no more positions for All NBA, correct?
Correct.
So for Tatum to get his 4th straight All NBA team, he's gonna have to beat out Giannis, Luka, Shea, and Jokic for sure,
Mhm.
right? Those guys are definitely gonna make it. And then you look at second team, it was Jalen Brunson, Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, Anthony Edwards, and Kawhi. I would say Kawhi
Yeah.
is probably a guy that's not gonna make a team this year, just based off of where his reputation is. Third team was Booker, Curry, Halliburton, LeBron, and Sabonis. Who do you see potentially supplanting Jayson Tatum on first team All NBA?
I mean, the easy candidates are going to be Brunson, Edwards, and Booker. I think those are the 3 guys that I would look at that, depending on their season. And KD wasn't on that list, right? Because he didn't hit the 65 games, I
No,
believe.
he was second team.
He was second team. Okay, so
Yeah,
KD would be the other guy. So
yeah,
those would be the 4 guys. And I mean, honestly, even sprinkle in Jaylen. That would be like the peak Jaylen season
yeah.
if he gets to first team All NBA. But based on what I'm saying around the conversation between the two of them, if Tatum gets off to a slow start, like we know narratives play a role in this. And like I just mentioned, Jaylen's going to get a bump. Tatum's not really at a place where he's getting a bump. He just has to produce, and he has a
Right.
new level of expectation where
I think
he's
the
not going to
path
get the same
for
praise.
right, the path for Jalen to make a first team All NBA is injuries, right? Where Tatum has been so, so consistent with his availability over the years. Something happens to Tatum where he misses a 25 game stretch this year, and Jaylen is thrust into that number one option role, where he shines. So I think, Booker, he was definitely one of the darlings of the summer. I just don't think he's going to make a first team All NBA. He might. I think it's just as likely that Jaylen makes one.
I mean,
as
here's the
Booker
thing:
makes one.
if the Suns actually make a run into the top 4 in the West, it's going to be because either him or KD or him and KD are having insane seasons,
Yeah,
right?
it's fair.
So
Yeah.
so that opens the door for at least one of them, depending on who's having the better season, to make a run. And then Brunson, we've talked about with the revamped Knicks team. I mean, there was that was the spot that was up for debate last year, and then they flip flop spots in the MVP race where Brunson finished 5th and Tatum finished 6th. So that was
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
the split decision. And then Edwards is the guy that has he's got the most juice probably going into the year as far as like someone outside of those top. It feels like everyone has kind of said the top 4 guys. Maybe you mentioned Embiid, by the way. If Embiid's healthy throughout the season, that's the other guy
That's true.
as
Wemby.
as well. Wemby, right? So there is potential. There is. I don't know if Wemby has to be mentioned. He has to be mentioned with everything now. That's just
Right.
the rule. Is that Wemby has to be mentioned. I don't think he's gonna. I would be shocked if Wemby jumped to first team All NBA this year, but I kind of do expect him to be second, third team. Like that's where we're already seeing Wemby. But there are guys that can certainly make a run at that first team All NBA case. But if the shooting returns and the Celtics are once again I think they won 64 games last year. The Celtics win, let's say 57 games, 58 games, and they're the 1 seed. And Tatum's playing, at about what we're expecting now. It's going to be hard to say, hey, someone else deserves it on a 49 win team
Right.
or whatever it might be. So
Our course, maybe Ja.
Yeah, Ja's another guy. Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, Zion, if he ever stays healthy, but
Yeah.
that's something we can't bank on. So I think there will be some guys that can challenge for it, but it is one of those things where he's in pole position. But he also does face the not winning the NBA Finals MVP, the bad Olympics, that he is not going to get the benefit of the doubt, which he should, but he's not going to, unfortunately. And it's really interesting to see the dynamic where I think Jaylen's going to get the benefit of the doubt a lot of time. Jason's not, on the other hand. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But when we look at the realistic scenario for Tatum for the upcoming year, once again, very similar to Jayson. I think it's more closer to first team All NBA top 5 in MVP, and him having, him not reaching that level would be second team All NBA, 7th or 8th in MVP. Like that to me is kind of like I'd say it's more realistic. He's first team in top 5, but worst case, it might be second team in top 8. Like that's kind of the land Jayson Tatum's in for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done all we need to do on JT at this point. He's the thing that came out. I forget who made the comparison, calling him like the Tim Duncan of wings. Where did you see that?
I don't know if I saw that, but I like that though.
Yeah, so like if that's where Jayson Tatum lives for the next year or two, is where he's not the sex out there, but he gets wins, and he pencil him in for 55 wins a season just because Jayson Tatum's on the team. I'm cool with that right now because I just want to continue to rack up those banners as a Celtics fan.
Well,
we have
like
such a short window.
With Tatum, his superstar skill is that he's great at everything, right? Like there's nothing that he's like horrible at. There's probably not one thing you can say he's definitively the best at, but he's at the top of almost everything you would need, and which is why his superstar skills, he's the easiest superstar to build a team around. And that's what you're seeing with the Celtics, is that he fits and works with everybody. So, all right, I think we spent enough time on the Jays. Let's go to the back end of this wing rotation. This is where I think it can get a little bit interesting. Let's start Hauser, who I think lives in kind of his own tier from the next 2 guys that we're going to talk about. So with Sam Hauser, he came off an unbelievable season, ended up getting an extension at 4 years, $45 million. And so best case scenario for Sam Hauser, a lot of this is just the continued development. He is the Celtics poster boy for their ability to develop, right? Like Sam Hauser is the guy that you look to. And so for him, I think it's continuing to put yourself in that category of maybe he's the new Kyle Korver, right? Like that's kind of the target demographic that Hauser is heading to, and continuing to grow on the defensive end. One of the things that I think has been somewhat overlooked, probably not necessarily by Celtics fans, because I think we've become very aware that people love to go white boy hunting on Sam Hauser, and it doesn't usually work out in their favor. Go ask Luka about that in the finals. And so I think Hauser being able to continue to grow on that defensive end, being able to, add in a little bit of attack off of maybe like a pump fake. That's kind of the next evolution for Sam. Is just add little things. There's not major strides that are needed from Sam, but it's can we guarantee and write in, 18 to 20 minutes a game for Sam Hauser. That's when you get to his best case scenario.
Yeah, and considering the Celtics invested in Sam Hauser with a contract extension, 4 years, 45 million, he needs to produce. He was on, the contract he was on the last couple of years, he was making a pittance. Will, remember that word from a few episodes
Good
ago? He was
word.
making a pittance, couple million here or there.
Which he
And I
still is
think,
on for this year, to be clear. So
yeah,
he's still on. I think it's like 2 million this year, a little over 2 mil. I don't have the exact number in front of me. And then next year we'll have that jump.
right. Yeah. I think his contract extension goes through the 28-29 season. So best case scenario with Sam for sure is that contract looks like a steal, because when you think about some of the other just like pure shooters out there on the market and how some teams have overpaid to keep them. Other teams, actually I'm thinking about the Heat both times here with Duncan Robinson overpay and they had to let Max Strus walk to the Cavs. I think if he can become a more consistent Duncan Robinson, because Duncan Robinson has been in and out of the Heat rotation since he signed that contract. At times it looked like a steal. At times it looked like one of the worst contracts in the NBA. 4 years, 45 for Sam Hauser is probably the market of what a knockdown shooter should be at this point in the NBA landscape. And if he can do what Duncan Robinson has done, which is develop, to your point, a little bit more off the bounce. We saw that Sam Hauser catching some dunks last year. Maybe Sam Hauser shot fake 1 or 2 dribbles, makes the next pass, throws a couple more alley oops to somebody in the dunker spot. I think that's what we can expect out of Sam Hauser. Just a little bit more playmaking and continuing to be one of the best 3-point shooters, movement shooters that's out there in the game. Because quite honestly, there's not anybody out there at the wing position that I would probably rather have. Outside of, I'd say maybe Trey Murphy would be like the top level of a guy that lives in the same land as Sam Hauser.
Yeah.
Like
I
Trey
mean, he's
Murphy's
also a
one of
guy
those
that
guys. Go ahead.
Well, Trey Murphy's a guy that feels like he's just like not given the opportunity to do more, but he can probably do more. I
Do
think.
way
I don't
more.
know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Whereas with like, I think the Hauser, Strus, Duncan Robinson comparisons are more apt because it's we love what you do. We need what you do. Can you do just a little more? Whereas with Trey Murphy, it's like, can we trade some guys here so we can give you more
Yeah.
opportunities? Like you know what I mean? There's a difference to those levels, but I totally agree with what you're saying. And looking at some of the Strus and Duncan Robinson numbers, like when Strus was hitting 41%, then dropped down to 35% the last 2 years shooting from 3, whereas Duncan Robinson was 41%, set the world on fire, especially out in the bubble or so. Shot 44%, then shot 41%, and then it dropped all the way to 32% in the 22-23 season before bouncing back last year to 40%. And with Sam, I mean, since he really started getting playing time the year before last, he was shooting 4.2 threes per game at 41.8%. And then last year, knocked that up to 6 threes a game at 42.4%. So for Sam, if you're going to live in that crew, like I said, Kyle Korver is kind of the goat of these 3-point assassins that we look at. You got to stick above that 40% line, right? That's what is your bread and butter that keeps you out there. But what can grow your game from, I mean, he averaged 22 minutes per game last year in the regular season. That did drop down to about 15 in the postseason. So I think really when we look at the postseason, what can rise that minutes per game from 15 to 18, almost up to 20, is going to be that ability, like you said, to defend and to be able to just have a little bit, can you make that, pump fake one extra pass? Can you, Duncan Robinson, this is probably his most underrated because he's an amazing cutter. Duncan
Mhm.
Robinson is a
True.
great cutter.
Yeah.
Is can Sam Hauser develop, that maybe that type of movement? Because that once again is also going to help you get more open shots if you're able to be that movement guy that maybe you're cutting to the basket, maybe you're flaring out for a three on the wing. It makes you even that more dynamic. So when we look at worst case scenario for Sam Hauser, I think it just becomes, man, everything you mentioned with Duncan Robinson, where we saw that dip, where it's, man, that shooting all of a sudden now he's in what seems like a year-long slump, and he's shooting 33% or 34%, and he's not doesn't have that same gravity that he once had. The defenses find a way to expose him, whether it's his own regression or it's some type of schematic invention that's a team is able to find, and they continue to go after him. I think that's where that would be the worst case scenario. Like you said, I think the 4 years, 45, the fact that they could get to that number kind of saves the Celtics a little bit, because it's just not it's not the $20 million a year, right? Like,
Mhm.
you're only going to be hurt so much if there's a certain level of regression from Sam Hauser. But I think for him it's just pretty straightforward. Does the shooting continue to maintain at the elite pace that he's at, and does the defense continue to grow where he's able to be in some of these meaningful games for longer stretches?
Yeah, I'm trying to find Buddy Hield's contract, right? He signed with who? The Warriors?
I can't remember if he was traded, or I think he did
Yeah,
sign. I think
so
it was.
he agrees to a $21 million Warriors contract after 76ers sign and trade. So Buddy Hield, in terms of movement shooting, has been like kind of the top of the top over the last few
Mhm.
years. So he did 2 years, 21 million. So
Yeah, it's about ten and a
basically,
half million per year. Yeah.
yeah, so basically the same contract Hauser gets, but just cut in half in terms of the length there. So that seems to be the market with Sam. And I think, worst case scenario, he has a little bit of a down year, but that contract is still a very tradable piece in the offseason. If
Mhm.
they, a guy that we're going to get to, sorry, another fly coming around my room here. If we're going to get to Baylor Scheierman, Jordan Walsh here in a second, if they realize that we have a Hauser replacement in Scheierman much cheaper, Sam Hauser making 10.5 million, you could definitely get something back for that. So I think that's the worst case scenario, is that Sam doesn't really fit in the long-term future of the Celtics and just becomes a
Mhm.
trade piece that can bring something back.
And here's the thing, everyone's looking for shooting, right? So
Mhm.
even if Sam regresses, there's still going to be someone that goes, you know what, that contract's not that bad, we could really use this. There's going to be somebody out there that would want that piece. So I think regardless, the realistic case for Sam is that his value, it's going to be really tough for his value to diminish too much with that contract, with having the number one ability that all NBA teams are looking for, which is more shooting. There's going to be some appeal to Sam Hauser. So not a lot of worry for me with Sam Hauser. It's just, can he get to the point where, in game, can we give Jayson and Jaylen maybe an extra minute, an extra 2 minutes that add up throughout the season? Because, hey, we trust Sam Hauser to be out there defensively, or Sam's added a little bit, and you have so many guys that you can play off of, that I think that's a realistic possibility. So I think for Sam Hauser, we'll see what it looks like, but I have no reason to doubt that his shooting will continue to be what it's been. It will be elite, and then we'll see about the defense, and we'll see about playmaking off of that pump fake or off of that jump shot. But you mentioned, let's go to the last two guys here, because I think they
Can you
kind of.
can you do me a favor before we go to these
Yeah,
last two? Can you switch the heading down the bottom? Because it's my
yeah.
training camp battle. So let's go to my training
Okay,
camp
so
battle
let's
here.
let's let's add this in here. So one of the things that we wanted to do with each of these training camp previews, obviously, we're doing best case, worst case, but we also have Greg's training camp battle. So for this one, we're gonna talk about Jordan Walsh, and we're gonna talk about Baylor Scheierman. Greg, lead it off here. Tell us where you want to go with it, because I think you're totally right. These guys are gonna live in a very similar realm for this upcoming season.
Well, Jordan Walsh is the younger of the two, despite Shireman being the actual technical rookie. In this case, Shireman is
Real
an
quick,
older
just on
rookie.
NBA ages, I forget how I ended up doing this, but I started looking at like old rankings the other day. I think I was watching college football, and I was like, man, how many of these guys actually like turn into something? And I started doing it for like NBA and NFL while I was like watching TV, and I got to I think it was the 2015 or 2016 like top 100 on ESPN, and
Mhm.
it completely threw me off, but Tatum, Hauser, and Pritchard were all part of the same ESPN 100 group. And
Okay.
it's like, because Tatum's been in the league 3-4 years longer. Like, you don't think about it, but they're all the same age. Like,
Right.
that was just something that stood out to me. So very similar to what you're saying here with Walsh and Scheierman. Despite Walsh going into year 2, Scheierman being a rookie, Scheierman's actually the elder in the situation.
And it feels like Jordan Walsh has been like part of the Celtics longer than just 1 year. I don't know why. Like in my head, I was like, oh, he's going into his third year, but last year was his rookie year as a 19-year-old rookie. And, Joe Mazzulla just refused to play Jordan Walsh. Clearly wasn't ready despite having a pretty good year in Maine. I think if he was ready for any sort of significant time with the team, Joe would have given him a shot, but he just, he left him in Maine, put him in the game a couple of times. I think he played less than 10 games with the Celtics last year, if you want to look that up. But
Yeah,
I
I'll
feel
look
like
that
it's
up.
like 5.
Well, I know it took a while for him to get his first bucket because Svi was too busy jacking up threes at the end of the
Oh,
game.
man. Svi the Chucker. Yeah, but I think, with this training camp battle, Scheierman, I
Yeah, nine
probably
nine total games he appeared in.
Yeah. So Shireman, I think, has a better chance of actually cracking the rotation just because of what he brings to the table with his playmaking. He's a bigger player. He's a better shooter. He's got a high IQ. He's got a little bit more of a passing gene in him. Jordan Walsh is the kind of similar. We're talking about Lonnie Walker versus Jaden Springer, right? Where
Mhm.
Jaden Springer's the defensive specialist. Lonnie Walker is the offensive side of that. I kind of see the same thing with Shireman and Walsh, where there's a world in which Jordan Walsh's defensive potential earns him a spot. But I don't see it happening this year. I think he's still too raw, too young. Shireman's the guy that I have my eye on as actually potentially getting some time with the team this year. But I could see both of these guys just living in Maine for most of the year. But I think it's important for one of them sometime either this year or next year to like have a 10-game stretch where they're in the rotation. We're like, oh, we see a future with one of these guys because I don't think you can miss on both of these guys back-to-back years, especially when both of them do have a decent reputation coming out of college.
So it's funny because I think looking at these two players, and we talked a lot about Lonnie Walker in the last episode. This right here is probably the case for Lonnie Walker to not make the Celtics. Is
Mm,
that it's probably going to be easier and more tempting for Missoula when he needs to give minutes to, because we're really Brissett is that spot that's really open
mhm.
where Brissett played probably like 2/3. I don't have his total games he played up here in front of me, but played, let's say, 2/3 of the games, and got spot starts and got spot rotation minutes when people were out. Like, Brissett was that guy. Like, it was a pretty easy decision to go to him. If wings or guards were out, Brissett was in. That was a pretty easy decision. And I think the case for Lonnie Walker to not make the team is that exactly what you said. You can't miss on both these guys. You need one of these guys with all of the contracts that you have coming up. You've got to get something out of these guys while they're on these cheap deals, because you're going to have to probably make moves. Even if the Celtics win the championship, there's probably going to be something has to give. And we'll see what happens with the sale of this team. And that's the storyline that's going to be playing out in the background and will become, front page news at some point throughout the season when that sale happens. And it's what's going to happen when this becomes a $280 million tax team. And then the year after becomes nearly a $500
I
million
kind of look
tax.
at this, Will, as like as similar to what the Nuggets have going on with Peyton Watson and Christian Brown. Like it's like
Yeah. Throw in
they
Julian
need.
Strouder in that mix as well, too. Yeah.
Right, they need one of those. Like, Brown has been the guy that's kinda popped a little bit, probably gonna be elevated to the starting role, but there's
Hmm.
no reason why, just because we have so much talent on the team, top-end talent, that we just shouldn't expect anything out of our rookies. I kinda hear that from some people just, like, talking about the Celtics, like, it doesn't matter if Jordan Walsh pans out, like, he's a late first round pick. Same thing with Baylor Scheierman, late first round pick. They don't always work, but you need to hit on one of these guys.
Right.
We've seen this with Peyton Pritchard, right? Peyton Pritchard, late first round pick, ended up being something. Grant Williams, while he was on the team, ended up being something. And I think to miss on both of these guys would be a huge miss. And I think Shireman of the two, although I love Jordan Walsh, as I've said many
Hmm.
times, he just like reminds me, I don't think he's going to be nearly as good as Andre Iguodala, but he just reminds me of Iguodala, his defensive instinct, the way he moves around the floor, his fluidity as an athlete, not as explosive as Iguodala was, not as good of a shooter, not as good of a playmaker, but I think that he has something in there that I like. With Scheierman, it's very easy to make the comparison, but it's like Joe Ingles, you know, he's like a 6'6", 6'7" white lefty that can shoot the ball and can run a good pick and roll. If that's what he ends up being, that's a pretty good player to have as your eighth or ninth man 2 years down the road with Scheierman. If he can be a Joe Ingles light, I think that would be really nice for the Celtics.
Yeah, I think now that as we're talking this through, if Lonnie Walker makes this team, that's going to tell you a lot about what Joe Mazzulla thinks about the development of Jordan Walsh and Baylor Scheierman.
Yeah,
like it's gonna, and I think if Lonnie
Walker could have put
on,
Lonnie Walker with the wings. Yeah.
Well, we could have. Yeah. I mean, they're in a similar boat here, and we mentioned the O'Shea Brissett spot as well in the last podcast about where Lonnie Walker would be, and it's that 8th, 9th guy that we're talking about here. After you get past Peyton Pritchard, like that's where it's kind of open, and we know the bigs kind of live in their own island as far as what that's going to be, and we'll talk about them in the next episode. But if Walker is cut, and then I think that's going to lead to, okay, Joe, if we're not going to have Lonnie Walker on this team, you got to play, maybe not every night, but these guys have got to get real opportunities, not garbage time opportunities, but they've got to get some opportunities in the regular season to show who they are, what they are, and where they are as far as their development goes. Like that has to be made an emphasis, not an overly, it's not a top priority, but it has to be somewhere on that priority list to give them real minutes.
Yeah, and I think when you think about Mazzulla and his growth from year 1 to year 2 and like little things like game management, timeouts, and things like that, year 3, I think for Mazzulla, one thing I want to see is exactly what you're saying, is finding out ways to give guys like Kata, Walsh, Scheierman opportunities to actually play and hoop for this team, because we won the championship. Pressure's off in terms of like regular season success. It's all about hanging banner 19 now. And to get there, we need all of our top guys to be healthy. And we're going to need somebody that's in that 9th to 11th guy range to have a moment in the playoffs. And you need to give them opportunities to see what you have, because we know the Celtics with their top 7, we know exactly what they can do. We know that's a championship roster. Now we need to see what else we have. Walsh, Scheierman are definitely guys that need an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think fans are going to be, especially, they're going to get a lot of run, I think, in these preseason games. Like, we're going to see a lot of Walsh, a lot of Scheierman. So I think there's going to be some decent excitement for them by the time we get to the regular season, which is under a month away right now when the Celtics tip off with the Knicks. So we'll have to see, but that is going to be Greg's training camp battle to watch for. Walsh and Scheierman. We'll throw Lonnie Walker in there because I think who makes the roster, who ends up in Maine, that will tell you a lot about the vision of who might get some of those spot rotation minutes that went to O'Shea Brissett last year. But that's going to do it for this episode here of Green with Envy. As we mentioned, this is part 2 of our 3-part training camp preview. We'll be back later in the week. Media Day coming up September 24th. So make sure you guys are locked in. NBC Sports and such are going to have all of the different interviews going on. So we'll be tuned into that. We'll see what sound bites we get, what information Greg and I will react to later in the week. And then we will also break down for you the battle of the bigs. No Kristaps Porzingis to start the season. So what does that look like? What are the rotations? What are the expectations? We will get into all of that and more on our next episode, but we appreciate you guys for tuning into this one. Make sure you like, subscribe, make sure you follow us on YouTube. All of our podcasts are also uploaded to our YouTube page as well. So if you want the visuals, if you want to see a bug flying around on Greg's mic, you want to see us, just our animation, see what we're talking about, see what our backgrounds look like, go log into the YouTube page and check us out there. But Greg, any final thoughts here before we send this out to some Black Sheep Optimists?
No final thoughts.
All right, we're sending it out here. We'll catch you guys later in the week. Peace. It feels like summer, baby. Oh, mama, you feel like summer. New season got me seeing new colors. So fly, the sky will kiss you. Lips so smooth, I miss your issues. Oh, mama, you feel like summer. New season got me seeing new colors. Oh, my, I'm slipping into white lies and time. Now you're 3 shots deep that you chase with the Croy. You're looking at me while you